When I first heard that Asmongold and OTK's game publishing company, Mad Mushroom, had announced their first game, I couldn't care less. But a while later, I heard Emeru describe it as a Risk of Rain-like, and then it jumped up to the top of my must-try list. Risk of Rain 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I consider it to be one of the greatest games ever made. And aside from Crab Champions, we haven't really had many people try to copy or iterate on the formula, possibly because it's such a great game that it feels like a daunting task. So I am immediately interested in any team that's trying to do so, and that's kind of what Bitcake is doing, but not really. It's kind of complicated. Before we get into it, the game is currently playable as a pre-alpha demo, so this is still very early, and not only does it have a lot of issues that are to be expected, but it's all very subject to change. And that's why I'm making this video, to take a look at it and provide as much feedback, both the good, which there is plenty, and the bad, which some of it is game-breaking, and I mean, this game tried to kill my PC, and some of my personal suggestions are going to be near the end of what I think this game could be or what I personally would like to see from it. To start off, Atomic Picnic is a 3D roguelite, so there's a lot going on. It does mimic a lot of things from Risk of Rain 2, but it also combines that with a bullet heaven type progression system. You level up, and every time you level up you get a new item, and you can also run around the map and shoot these little crystal things which award you a currency that you can use for upgrades in that same run, or for meta upgrades outside of the run that stay forever. The best part about the game is the core mechanics, which is what you're going to be doing all of the time. The running, jumping, the use of your Spider-Man double jump swing, and your dash all feel really good and offer you precise controls that behave just as you imagine when you see them. It has a basic system of slowing you down when you shoot, as well as an active reload system, and both of these are well tuned and add depth to gameplay and decision making, just as they should. The act of shooting enemies offers a decent amount of visual feedback. I would maybe like a little more, and the audio feedback is a little lacking. Not just when shooting enemies, but in general. Games like these can get pretty hectic pretty fast, and I felt the soundscape wasn't used as well as it could have been. The sound cues never really clued me into enemies spawning or from where or what type of enemy, and the same happens with events or healing shrines spawning. They have some large text across the screen for this stuff, but I would much prefer a sound. So moving and shooting feels really good, and you always feel in control, and while that sounds simple, it's not. Many games never nail this down, so it's great to see that this feels as good as it does here, pending finer refinements, I suppose. In the demo, we have access to 4 characters, which I honestly don't know if they have any differences beyond cosmetic, but I really don't think so. You also have 3 grenades or equipment to select from, and 4 weapons, being an assault rifle, a grenade launcher, a sniper, and a shotgun. I felt all of these weapons were pretty good, with the assault rifle being kind of the default easy mode, and also for some reason I don't like the sound of it before you upgrade it. After that it gets decent. And also the grenade launcher is a little underpowered for solo play. The shotgun and sniper are a little more difficult to manage in the early game, but they scale really well with upgrades and are very strong the later you go into a run, and they do outclass the assault rifle in the endgame. This game obviously has a strong focus on multiplayer co-op with people running different builds, so each of these weapons fills in a different role, and I think they're pretty balanced and fun to play with. They have a little bit of diversity in the builds you want to prioritize. We'll talk a lot more on that later on. But truly, what's here at the center is good. It's snappy, it's responsive. I never felt like the game put me in a situation where a mistake wasn't my own. Enemy variety is another highlight, given that there's a lot of it, even here in the pre-alpha demo. I personally don't like the designs much. I'm sure I could get used to them, but they kind of look like Pokemon, and as you progress in the run, they just change the colors to indicate that they're a tougher version, so then they look like shiny Pokemon. But this is just personal preference, so neither here nor there. The point is that all of these enemy types are important, because having immobile tanks that bombard and flying enemies that pester, enemies that chase you down, others that can control space, the combination of all of these helps keep the game hectic. But as a counterpoint, I never really felt like I had to prioritize any targets. They're all kind of there, and as long as you're always moving, they all pose a similar threat. And that led to a lot of time where I was simply kiting mindlessly without anything to surprise me or make me change up my tactics. and that element of time wasting is something that, again, we'll talk about in the bad section. Generally speaking, these sorts of games get easier the more players are in them, and I think certain enemies should pose a little bit more of a threat to lead to those natural callouts of, hey, this enemy type is here, let's all focus fire that one down. The upgrades or items that you get are all pretty standard fare. The most interesting one transforms your weapon trigger to work like a minigun so that it requires revving up before it fires, and that's a really cool concept, but at the moment it feels like a straight downgrade, with the downside being very big in that you have to rev it up, and the upside being increased fire rate very small, especially since there's an upgrade that increases magazine size and fire rate just straight up. Some of the other more creative ones are focused around the active reload mechanic, but they feel underpowered, and your weapon automatically reloads if you don't fire, so you might not even use it that much. I think that the automatic reload is a smart decision, but maybe an option to manually reload could do some good and increase the value of these items. I don't know if that could mess up the balance, but really they are just underpowered. The rest, though, are very standard and not very creative. They increase damage or fire rate or add different proc chains from explosions to firing extra projectiles, piercing, whatever. They all work really well, and the most important part of them is there, which is that increase of power. The feeling you get towards an end of a run where you have this domino chain effect of all of your items destroying mobs. You fire once and a bullet pierces 3 enemies and then bounces to another, and then that also explodes and makes you shoot out arrows, and once you see all of that destruction from one bullet and all the experience crystals drop, you get that good dopamine rush, and that's very much nailed here. That's good. So even if we're missing a lot of items and just variety in it, I'm quite confident that whatever they put in will still lead to this really good feeling at the end, just with different tweaks, which is very important in a game like this. So what is outright bad about the game at the moment? Well, for starters, the main menu threatens to kill my PC, and that needs some immediate work. I'm not an expert. I know some stuff, but not enough to speak confidently on why this is happening. But I obviously am not risking my PC to test this out more. The gist of it is, in the main menu, the game will continue to eat up more and more resources at an exponential rate until my PC shuts down. There's no blue screen, there's no game crash, it's just a complete shutdown of my PC. The first time it happened, I heard my PC fans speed up and then just blast away into ultra speed, and then boop, full crash. So next time I opened the game, I idled at the menu and watched as Task Manager told me how my CPU and GPU utilization were just climbing forever, and then quickly killed the task to see it return to normal. Once in game, everything runs well. It's not the most optimized game, again, pre-alpha demo, so it does utilize a lot of resources from what is a current top-of-the-line rig, but nothing crazy. There's no spikes, there's no constant growth, no memory leaks, it's just standard. But the moment I'm in the main menu, that just keeps going until it goes to a full shutdown. And trust me, that shit is scary. If I ever downloaded a game and in the main menu I heard my fans ramp up like this, you can bet I'm uninstalling and probably never touching it again. I've left my PC specs as well as the resolution I play at, which is quite uncommon and might be a factor in this, in the description below. And I hope the developers can figure out what's causing it, because maybe it's happening to other people as well. Also, I didn't end up upgrading things with the meta upgrades, because that's in the main menu. So, yeah. My PC is literally my entire livelihood, and I bought it with the blood, sweat, and tears of a lot of hard work, so I feel like I took enough risks to review this game as is. Sorry. But there's a reason I started with the positives. Making games is really hard, and these sorts of things can happen due to combinations of hardware or freak interactions of any kind. There's a reason the game is in pre-alpha, and this is not something to hold against the devs, but I do have to say it because, man, I've never seen that happen before. Anyways, I said before that this isn't really a Risk of Rain-like, and that's because while its gameplay is very similar at its core, everything else isn't. For those unaware, Risk of Rain 2 is a roguelite that plays very similarly to Atomic Picnic, but its structure and goals are completely different. In Risk of Rain, the progression loop is based around speed and efficiency. Each area you spawn into has chests scattered about, and these chests have different types and costs, and they all cost you money to open. Each enemy you defeat drops money, so you have to combine killing enemies and opening chests, making constant decisions as to what chests to open first in hopes that the upgrade you get will speed up this loop. Once you clean out a zone, you move on to the next. The difficulty of enemies increases over time, so you want to outpace that difficulty increase by going quickly, but you don't want to leave precious upgrades behind, meaning that efficiency is very important to success. It also means that mobility is very valuable not only in combat, but to explore each area quickly and thoroughly in order to find all the chests and open them. Atomic Picnic doesn't have any of this. Instead, it uses a more traditional roguelite system where enemies drop experience, but like in a Bullet Heaven or a Vampire Survivor style game. And after each level up, you choose from 3 upgrades. However, the difficulty and experience that enemies drop also scales with the timer, meaning that technically, the most efficient way to play Atomic Picnic is that if you get lucky and get all the objectively good upgrades, things like more damage and more fire rate, increased magazine size, or piercing, you want to run around the map and waste time, farming up the currency for the meta upgrades until stronger enemies show up that will give you better XP. And that's because the bosses here spawn after you take down a certain number of enemies. So if you're looking to maximize your power before bosses, you want to make each kill count for the most XP it can. Now, it isn't a huge difference, but I'm sure over longer runs it adds up and compounds. I've tested this multiple times, reaching the mini-boss anywhere from having just barely or not even reaching level 10 to reaching level 11 comfortably during the fight. And this is notable because level 10, probably to minimize all of this we're talking about, requires a huge jump in XP from what you need to level 10. And of course, this does compound towards the boss, which I've reached from level 18 all the way up to level 20. Now, I don't like this. It's not the worst thing ever, but I don't like gameplay systems that make me run around doing nothing to play optimally. If bosses came at specific times or whenever you choose to trigger them, it means that getting lucky and being overpowered means I can take down more enemies, which is the fun part of the game, and push that advantage. But with this system, I just wait around doing nothing for a while. This might have been done this way to incentivize that running around and collecting that meta currency, which you can also spend during your run for upgrades. But I don't think it's as fun to be happy that I'm overpowered and I can now finally run around shooting little crystals instead of mowing down enemies. And those extra levels that you can eke out can be game-changing because all you really need is one of the more powerful upgrades, namely the Untamed Whistle, which increases damage and fire rate, to really feel a big difference in your run. This can all be considered subjective, but I don't think that core progression and motivation to go through the game ends up being clear, and for as much fun as I think the game is, the one thing holding me back from jumping in and playing more is that I now associate getting a good run with wasting my time instead of enjoying that power fantasy, and that sucks. This also leads into that exploration of the map, because aside from healing shrines or going to the upgrade stations that don't really offer very useful upgrades, you don't feel motivated to move around the map much. So sure, you can collect that currency for those upgrades, but the ones during the run don't feel very impactful, so I'm fine standing in my favorite zone and letting enemies come to me. In other words, if you're overpowered, you get to not fight enemies and run around collecting currency. But if you're not overpowered, you sit still in a place and fight enemies. And I don't think either of these are good. As an example of what I'd like, right, something that fixes the issue, would be if the upgrades that you can purchase in the run were more expensive but a lot more powerful. That way, a core part of each run would be to move around the map as efficiently as you can while taking down enemies, to collect that currency, and then trade it in for one of those powerful upgrades. Now, at the moment, the currency you get is shared with the currency for the meta progression. So to make them more expensive in-game, you would have to tweak stuff around or maybe add a second currency for those upgrades in the game. But something like this would help fix what I'm talking about. Some of the best parts in gameplay of Atomic Picnic are when you're running around the map and jumping all over the place and you're sniping people after you did your Spider-Man swing. So I like systems that would encourage me to move around and be stylish while I do things, and for that, there needs to be incentives to actually move around. I don't think that the little crystal currencies are enough, and for just combat, you can loop in a hallway, and that's good enough. So, yeah. If there is one incentive to go places right now, it's actually really bad, because it's the dreadful mini-boss, Little Mac. He spawns after you take down 200 enemies, and he can instant teleport on top of you, and he has a giant zone that slows you to a crawl. You can just barely dash out of it, and normally he'll just teleport on top of you again. It's very frustrating, because it doesn't matter how good your run is, you feel like the game is just telling you that this is the end, like you're fighting death at the end of Vampire Survivors. The truth is, you can just jump to a higher area when he teleports onto you, and you shoot him from above. When he manages to come up, you drop down, and then repeat this cycle. And this is not difficult. This is actually very easy. This makes the boss a joke. So he's either impossible if you don't know how to deal with him, or way too easy if you do. And I don't think that's good balance. Especially for a player who doesn't know the strategy, they could just hit themselves up against a brick wall and drop the game. So he needs to be balanced in a different way. You should be able, even if it's difficult, to just fight him while kiting him and running away from him and dodging stuff. But if you want to leave the cheese in, that's also fine. It's just, right now, he's not in a good place. This is in contrast to the actual boss, which is the giant jellyfish. This is a multi-phase fight that feels very designed to be done with a team, not solo. But at the same time, it's pretty well done. You first knock out its shield, and then you shoot its eyeballs all around it. And then this repeats. Each time he adds more attacks that you have to dodge, and adds that spawn around him. It's hectic and chaotic, but you also know exactly what you're supposed to do and can stay focused the entire time. It's also pretty easy to understand on a first playthrough. In some slightly smaller but still important complaints, I find it completely unacceptable that a game like this, in single player mode, doesn't allow for me to pause. It makes sense in a multiplayer game, but if I'm playing solo, I should be allowed to pause the game. And I almost didn't write this down, because every time that I tried to pause the game to take notes, I couldn't. Another thing is how you activate health shrines, which is by shooting. Other interactables like the upgrade stations require you to hold down a key, but health shrines are activated by damage. I'm unsure if this was done to allow for them to be activated while you run towards them, or for the players to have to manage the risk of activating them accidentally while in combat. I could respect the decision of the latter. It could be interesting to have to stay away from them or carefully manage your shots while close, but then there's things like the passive teddy bear item, which gives you a damaging aura around you, that can activate it, as well as other proc chain effects, and those really shouldn't. I think that these would be better with a quick button tap to activate, but at the minimum, area of effects and passives shouldn't break these open. They are a valuable resource that you have to manage, and backing into one on accident and wasting it just because you took an item will never leave a player, and especially never a team, with a good feeling. Then there is, of course, item balance, which I mentioned before. There are certain items like the whistle for damage and fire rate, as well as the glasses for magazine size or the nail for piercing, and these are just dramatically better than others. And the chain gun revving one you kind of never want to take. I think there needs to be some balancing done, and maybe you could guarantee some of the higher priority items every 5 levels or something, so that you never reach the boss with 0 whistles or glasses, but this is a much larger conversation that needs to happen around balance once all of the items are in the game. So now, I just want to talk about my personal opinion on Atomic Picnic and what I think it could be. Like I said, I absolutely love Risk of Rain 2. And I want more games like it, and I want them to be excellent. I also, in a take that some people hate me for, have no problem with free-to-play games, nor games as a service. At the end of the day, these are vehicles to deliver games, and they can be used in many different ways. It's like a syringe. Syringes can be used to save lives, or for other purposes that can very easily ruin lives. Or they can give you attack speed and Risk of Rain. But the point is, the syringe isn't what's bad. It's what you put in it and how you use it. So the idea of a live service take on this formula, or free to play, I'm not really sure what the model's going to be, is actually interesting. And Mad Mushroom has said over and over again that there will be no pay to win, and considering who they are, I think we can trust that they won't allow it, considering the potential backlash towards them. And I mention all of this because I know monetization is a big part of making a game, and devs should get money if they make a great game. So I want them to lean into the potential that a game like this, with constant updates and new stuff all the time, could be a great thing that I would play with my friends often. But what would really make it a great game for me? Well, the biggest thing that's holding the game back, in my opinion, is depth and diversity. This is a format that can get very stale very quick, especially when there are other games that offer similar things that don't go stale for thousands of hours. And that's because you can kind of solve for the game, and it just becomes a loop, something that you do with your friends but doesn't require a lot of thinking and doesn't end up telling memorable stories. So to me, what's really missing is a lot of that depth. And what I'm talking about isn't fixed by adding more weapons, more equipment, or more items. What it needs are secondary abilities or secondary mechanics or passive. It needs more elements that can interact to form that sandbox, that lead to crazy cool interactions that are unique and make you build differently depending on your loadout. Now, I think that it's smarter to tie in passives and extra abilities to characters. That's because I think that the feeling of unlocking a character is much better than unlocking something that you can equip on a loadout menu. And I also think it helps for people to become attached to those characters. It also could mean that any new character that comes to the game is a big event, because it's now a completely new thing to try and understand and build around. So that is where I would personally lean, giving different characters their own identity with different movement options, special equipment, and secondary abilities, because all of that increases that replay value. And at some point, it doesn't matter if you copy from other great games. I've gone on record many times saying that good artists copy and great artists steal. Anything from melee-focused characters, or something that has higher mobility, or a glide, or a hover, or a character that can use explosions for damage and for mobility, it doesn't matter where you got the idea from. But anything that you add that's either another equipment slot or a secondary thing to use now means that each character can develop their own priority trees with their own different upgrades that they prefer, and they add more choice and diversity. And I think this could even be expanded into weapons, where if you choose a weapon, you could get specific items that benefit just that weapon, like a larger spread but more damage on the shotgun, or, less damage but a Titan spread, or more AoE on the grenade launcher, stuff like that. That diversity that leads to players wanting to experiment with each individual character and master them and find the wackiest, craziest combinations that you can pull off with each of them is what makes things like Risk of Rain 2 such a success, because you have to learn each character. They're so unique that each of them have a learning curve, not only to play them well, but to know what items work best on them. And this philosophy works in other types of games as well. In the bullet heaven genre, my current favorite is still HoloCure Save the Fans, precisely because the enormous roster of characters all have their own unique builds and priorities and synergies, so I'm always excited to jump in and learn and try something new, and it's something that other games like the recent Death Must Die also follow. I also have reviews of both of these games on my channel, by the way, along with a lot of other stuff, especially if you're into long video essays. Go to my channel and hey, maybe even subscribe. But what I'm getting at is that in a game like this, adding a new character as a live service, as an update that comes along with a bunch of new cosmetics, is always going to be a success. If the characters matter, or the abilities or the weapons are very transformative and offer tons of gameplay because it's all modular for you to explore, you're always going to get an influx of players coming in for each new update and then spending money on whatever you want them to spend money on. And I really don't think that Atomic Picnic will have a problem with monetization as a free-to-play game, because this type of game is ripe for stuff like cosmetics. It doesn't have to stop at character skins or weapon skins. I would love to see different weapon effects, so firing different bullets and adding different sounds, different hit markers or hit effects that are just fun and wacky for you to enjoy playing with your friends for a couple bucks here or there. If the game is actually free to play, it won't hurt the free to play players, and if it just wants to further monetize, well, I would be more careful there, but it could still work. So I have high hopes for this one. What's here at the core is very solid, and I really want to see where it goes. So yeah, I made this video because, like I said, I love these sorts of games, and if anything I can say can aid in making the game the best it can be, I'd be very happy. I hope that if what I'm saying is good, that it reaches the developers. That's really my main thought. But hey, I hope that at least it was entertaining to you if you watched through it, and hey, if the video does decently well, that's always a plus, so you can hit the like button. It genuinely helps in making the video reach more people and get more views, so I will eternally thank you if you hit the like button. I've been Mugthief, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.